So I was out the other day, I collected a bunch of logs. I'm doing a bit of clearing for some hydro lines. We're going to compare the Kershaw to the E-nep k-1. And we're going to start with the smaller logs here. These ones here, about an inch to an inch and a half, maybe 2 inches in diameter. And they work up to the far end of those ones there are about 6 inches in diameter, not quite 6. That's sort of the limit of what I think those two knives would be used for. I start small and work towards the big ones. Sharpen both the knives. The only issue I might run into, I put some checkering on the handle of the E-nep and a couple coats of linseed oil. It's not quite dry yet, so if it becomes a bit of an issue, if I find it slipping, then I'll postpone the test till another day till it's dry, but I don't think it'll be a problem. I'm not going to use the block, I'm just going to chop them free hanging, because I think with the smaller ones especially, the smaller logs, it's just going to go right through them with on the block, and it's not going to give you a very good indication of cutting ability, I think, because it's just chop right through them, no problem. So what I think is going to happen is that the lighter, sort of thinner geometry Kershaw will cut the smaller branches with a bit more ease, and as we get into the thicker woods, then the thickness and the weight of the E-nep will start to show its usefulness. So let me get the camera set up and we'll see how it goes. Now this wood's all very green. It was just cut within the last week, so it does make a difference. The upside with the E-nep, it's got enough weight, you just beat it apart. There's a fair variation in these woods. Some of the wood's a lot softer than others too. And there you can see the difference in the penetration ability between the two. Fair bit thinner profile, thinner edge geometry. Now we're starting to get into a point where they're almost equal. The wood's a little thick enough to support itself a bit more. Well, only time will tell. Could just be the piece of wood too. The handle modifications I did to this, I just sanded off the varnish that was on it. Sorry, put it back in screen here. Sanded off the varnish, put a little bit of checkering on it, left a fairly coarse file finish on it, and gave it a few coats of linseed oil. So far it seems like it's a lot better than the way it used to be. You can see too, some of the woods cut through a lot easier. I mean, a lot of the stuff, some of the stuff's just alder, which is a really soft wood. Some of it's poplar, but there's some harder stuff in there. There's a bit of elm, there's a bit of ash, and it's harder. I haven't got into that yet, but you'll definitely see a difference when I do get to that stuff, how much harder it is to cut. Penetration's still much higher. I actually suspect that if this wood was actually on the block, it was supported from underneath, that would easily be a 2-hit cut. You might even be able to do it in one if you got just the right cut on it. Yeah, see the wood split there, the wood split there, and there. So if that was supported underneath, I suspect I would have got a lot further through it. Retention in hand is definitely better now than it was before. Even though it's still a little bit oily from the linseed oil, it's not quite dry. And the wood's got such a variability. I mean, that's a piece of alder. It's trivial to go through it. I mean, it's soft wood, but it's also not very strong. It doesn't take much to split through it. Make yourself look like a champion if you cut that stuff up in front of you. That's just a wrist flick there. Try and do a cut here between that knot and this knot and see how it goes. Problem with this one though. The wedging gets kind of bad sometimes. And that's kind of what I figured as we got into the thicker woods, that the E-nep would start to pull ahead just because it doesn't. This wood's pretty green too. It's only just cut. It's a lot easier to cut than if it was dry. And that's just wrist flicks. I mean, not even any force into those. Bit more effort than this one just because it's a fair bit heavier. But this one does definitely hit a lot harder too. And you'll see that. We start to get into the bigger woods. The interesting thing is they're both fairly even in the amount of effort it's taking. This one swings a bit faster and it's a bit lighter, but it binds more, so you spend more time pulling it out. So you're using the energy to do that, sort of equal to the amount of energy it takes just to swing this one. Probably make some decent cordage from that bark if you want to spend the time on it. Nice. And that binding issue comes a bit of a problem there, and that wasn't an ideal placement, and it was in a bit of a funny angle, but maybe, just maybe. Managed to pick a spot right there. It was just all nuts. Still not bad. No issues with the edge whatsoever on that so far. I'm not finding any excessive vibration on either knife. Nothing uncomfortable. And when I was trying to shake this piece out of that stick, I hit my hand on it and kind of whacked my pinky a bit. But no excessive vibrations. No issues so far with either knife. And I find with this one, if I work it towards the tip a bit more, it binds a bit less. Now, I don't know if it's just because I got a bit more leverage to pull it out. Maybe I'm not getting the same penetration, I don't know. Seems to be a bit more fluid though, working it towards the tip. Definitely more power right here though, in this section. This definitely swings more like an axe than a knife. There's a lot of weight there. I mean, the balance point is there, basically. I mean, the sweet spot's sort of in here, but I sort of chop with it here a bit more. Anyways. Now, on this size of lumber with this knife, it's almost not worth it to put too much power into it because it just over penetrates and wedges. Like that. Now this one's interesting. This is a piece of elm, and the elm trees around here live for 30 or 40 years, and then they die off. So I don't know if this tree was alive or dead when it was cut. Find out soon enough, I guess. This one might have actually been alive when it was cut. Wood feels a little bit wet. don't think it had much more time left. It was definitely not doing well. Actually, you can see there, that bark coming off. That tree was dead. It's unfortunate, but it does make good firewood. So. Maybe not a good place to put that. block in here just to help me hold this. It's a bit too big to... it spans the gap. It doesn't give me enough to hold on to. Getting a bit too wide. The thing I'm finding that's interesting, I mean, this blade's definitely lighter, but you can see there, with this one you get a lot more options of where to hit. Like, the balance point on this blade is there. So really this section here, where the paint's worn off, is a nice power chopping section, but you can still work it towards the tip if you just want to do little snap cuts. This one, I mean, interesting enough, the balance points aren't that much different as far as the length of the knife goes. Puts your balance point here, but because of this deep belly and a bit of a recurve in through here, you're really sort of only limited into this area for cutting. You start to get out of that and it starts to get a little bit awkward and a little bit uncomfortable. Curious here to see how close the balance points are on these two knives as far as center, where they sit in relation to one another. Now that's interesting. Almost identical balance points on those two knives. Yet this one has so much more functional length. This one's so much more functional length because you can use it literally from here to here. Whereas with this one, you're limited to this area here. And it kind of limits the type of swing you can use. Like, you know, if you're getting a little bit tired from doing sort of heavier chops, you can just do little wrist pops, vice versa. Quite a bit of flex in that blade too. You can see that online, but or on the camera. If this knife was more rounded on the spine, it's a very sharp edge. I mean, it's got a dome to it, but it's a very sharp edge. And then this fuller here is also sharp. And I think if those two were rounded out, it might help with some of the binding on this knife, especially when you over penetrate. I don't know, something to maybe consider. Of course, when you're only going that deep in its binding, it's obviously nothing to do with the spine. fine too because I'm on a bit of an angle in comparison to where the blade is. My cuts tend to corkscrew a little bit up the thing. And if I rotate it towards myself, they seem to do that a bit less. And if I rotate away from myself, it just gives me something to look at, really, I guess. That was lucky. Just the tip. Yeah, see right there is a prime example of that. Just keep going all the way up to the end up with a corkscrew. Probably adds an extra 5 or 6 hits to the whole process.